In our study of the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo is describing the relationship between soul and nature, and we saw how there are two relationships, one in which at a lower level the soul embodied or in mind has a relationship of dependence on nature, where nature seeks to subjugate and direct the soul until the soul feels itself almost a product of nature and a toy or a puppet. And the same soul, risen into the divine consciousness, has a different relationship of freedom, of lordship, and even as master of nature, enjoys nature. The transition from the lower to the higher relationship is the theme of what we are now reading. The spirit is in possession of knowledge and will, which are of course originating from it, and therefore it is never subject to nature, and in proportion as the soul assumes its divine or spiritual being, it assumes also control of the movements of its nature. Sri Aurobindo makes reference to the Sanskrit word from the Bhagavad Gita. It becomes Swarat, free and a self-ruler over the kingdom of its own life and being. Then we saw the next step. It's not enough to have a local rule. As soul in spirit, it must extend that rule to the whole universe, because the universe is an expression also of spirit. So of this he says, but also it increases in control over its environment, its world. This it can only do by universalizing itself. For it is the divine and universal will that it must express in its action upon the world. And then follows a series of steps that he has described, which we saw in some detail last time. But we will review now from a more general perspective to see what is the broad framework of the logic and the nuances which are involved. Because if you read the rest of the paragraph, it can feel cryptic. It can feel something not quite tangible, because he says the soul must become harmonized with the universal. It must then submit its knowledge and will at their very source to the divine knowledge and divine will, and so arrive through submission at emergence, losing its personal light in the divine light and its personal initiative in the divine initiative. Now when you read something like that, you will wonder, what is this light, what is this initiative, what is this knowledge and will? Why not just say merge completely and everything else will be included in that? And so there are nuances in the very fact that Sri Aurobindo bothers to mention them. And the nuances are important because what Sri Aurobindo is aiming at is perfection. And it is possible to have a partial emergence in the divine, a partial poise of mastery, which in itself is extraordinary, but it will have something lacking. And unfortunately, when we look at the history of spirituality in the world, we find many examples of this. Great masters having attained to great, let's say, powers or great influence in the world, still had fallen short in some way or other, and that fine falling short could have massive consequences. Sri Aurobindo makes an observation that in 1920 he had already initiated and achieved the freedom of India. When he was working with the mother, they were in concentration, working on the higher planes, and they reached a point where it was done. And suddenly the mother said, "It is done." And Sri Aurobindo asked, how did it happen? Was there much bloodshed? And the mother said, no, they went as they came. So you see, the whole description is in the past tense. It's done, they went as they came. And you are speaking at a level of consciousness which is so high above that something there done is done, inevitably works out all the way down into the material plane. It's a question of time. In fact, when this was achieved, within a few months, the British had come to the negotiating table to discuss the terms of India's independence. It was at that time that Gandhiji, who had just come from South Africa, had not found his place in the political sphere. He took a different position from the build-up which had brought the British to the negotiating table. He said, we do not want freedom. Give our Muslim brothers the right to follow the Caliph of Turkey as their religious and political head. And then we will talk freedom. And so the British found it very convenient to talk with him and to sideline the whole discussion and negotiation. And it delayed freedom by 27 years. I'm saying this because something attained there still needs to work out, and in between there are many blocks, diversions, opposing forces. But what is achieved up there inevitably will get through. It's a question of time and circumstance only. But later on, Sri Aurobindo, referring to this event where they had achieved the freedom, he said the action was over mental. And therefore, although the freedom was acquired, it was divided freedom. India was partitioned when the British left because the initiation of that action was over mental. Now, to a normal person, it's a fine distinction. Somehow it's all divine up there, so over mental, supramental is just a question of vocabulary. And it's not. These are nuances which can make such a significant difference on the outcome. And that's why what may appear to us something very fine or almost irrelevant because it doesn't make sense to our present consciousness has enormous consequences when it comes to action in the world, especially resulting action in the physical world. It is when that highest power begins to act in matter that it faces the biggest resistance, and it is only its highest function in the supramental consciousness which can overcome that resistance. Anything less, and even fine degree less, which Sri Aurobindo calls the overmental, will have a limited outcome. And as you saw in this case, literally partition of India was unavoidable. Well, it was perhaps still avoidable, but the origination being in the overmental, there's always some lack, some fine lack. I'm giving this as an example to show you the importance of this, and particularly the perfection that Sri Aurobindo aims at. That when one attains to that divine status of consciousness and the soul acts in immersion in the divine consciousness, its action must be as perfect, as flawless as the divine action in the world. And therefore these fine nuances. So let's look at this, and from a practical perspective. Some of it will cover or repeat elements that we had touched upon last time, but now from a broader perspective. So the movement of ascent that has to take place, which he will then describe in greater detail in the next few paragraphs, that also must be accompanied by a movement of universalization. In practice, all of us experience a widening of consciousness. Increasingly, we include more and more of the world into our little ego self. But the concept of universalization is not that. This is widening of consciousness, which is good. But universalizing literally means extending all the way into the universe. And he takes the trouble to mention it must first extend its consciousness and see the universe in itself. Instead of being like the mind, limited by the physical, vital, sensational, emotional, intellectual outlook of the little divided personality. And so you could universalize yourself, perhaps go quite far, far enough that it makes no difference practically how far you are. But it's not enough. Perfection requires this reference. He says, see the universe in itself. So you could go very far and feel yourself universal, but until you see the entire universe within yourself, you have not completed it. And so this is the first reference we know, okay, we have still a way to go. This process of universalization is something which one can cultivate as we are. And we will begin in the part of us which is most flexible, which would generally be the mind's awareness. And it happens often to some of us spontaneously. You go for a walk, maybe on the beach or a mountain top, in the forest, and just the fact that you're somewhat distant or isolated from others, your consciousness opens out. You look at the ocean and there's a sense of expanse. You look down the valley, there's a sense of expanse. You feel the forest around you and you suddenly feel the sense of expanse. All of these are movements of widening of consciousness. And if we catch the feel of that, we can consciously extend further. Why limit with the forest? Try to feel the range beyond the forest. Why limit with the ocean? Try to feel the ocean beyond the horizon. Why limit with the valley? Feel the whole range of mountains. And a part of your mind's awareness extends as you feel or try to feel and reach out. Extend it to the whole earth. And at some point it may just acquire a picturing, a conception in the mind. But just the idea that in your mind you're reaching out already begins a fine process. At the same time, one works to establish this into the daily routine of life. When you come back from the mountain top, you don't narrow yourself again. You maintain that wideness. You will notice when you do that, all the clutter of the city feels as if somewhere inside you. It's not a nice feeling at first. You want to come back, you want to narrow down and block it with your walls. But you maintain that conscious effort to retain that wide sense. When you will deepen that wide sense, you will find yourself immune to the disturbances of the city. As long as it is still a part of the surface mind which does it, you will feel a little invaded. So this is one way you could begin. The other way to begin would be to go deep as you can within your consciousness, and then from there open to the wideness of the whole universe, and even conceive of the divine presence beyond the universe. You could feel it as your own consciousness, which is deep, vast, and something feels as if the world that you know normally is a bit on the surface, a little distant, and it doesn't disturb you. A third way, which would be more natural to the movement of devotion, would be to enter in relation with the divine, or the Divine Mother, whichever form, aspect is easier, and to feel that closeness, to feel yourself a child in the mother's arms, or like a flower in her presence, on her lap, but not to stop with a partial conception of her, but to know her as world mother, as cosmic mother, as divine mother, which means not just here supporting you, but supporting all, supporting the whole universe, and then extending beyond the universe, presiding over the whole universe's births, its dissolution, its birth, and that's the conception to which you relate to her. So you may begin in a part way, feel her presence, and then know her vaster. And where are you in this when she is as vast as the universe? It's as if you lean in her vastness, you join into her vastness, into her infinity. And in that sense, your consciousness also now shares, widens, but it's no more you, it is her. Your sense of I dissolves, loses itself in her vastness, which is your vastness, because there is no you that is separate. And using any one of these means, you will find the movement grows naturally, tends to become more and more stable, and leaves you capable of facing all the onslaught of life. Somewhere on the surface, someone gives you a knock, yes, the body feels pain. So if there is an invasion of disturbing energy, yes, it affects somewhere. But where does it affect? On the surface. I am deeper, wider, freer. Not affected or less affected, or even on that level immune, unable to be disturbed because so deep-rooted in that vastness. But yes, on the surface there are these ripples, and I deal with them as necessary. So such would be the nature of the stability into which one would begin to live more and more. Now when you look at all three methods broadly described, there is no fundamental contradiction between any of them. You could begin with the first, deepen into the second, and fulfill yourself in the third. Or begin with any one of them, whatever works. But this would be the movement of universalizing. And then he says, for it is the divine and universal will that it must express in its action upon the world. It must first extend its consciousness and see the universe in itself, instead of being like the mind limited. So when you have this some degree of widening of consciousness, you realize what are you expressing. As long as you were narrow, your views, your opinions, perspectives were so important. They were the only correct one. They were the only thing that mattered, and anything contradictory was like a collision. But the moment there has been a little bit of the widening, you see every viewpoint as part of the whole. Yes, perhaps some part of you has a preference by habit for this viewpoint, but you can see how there is a continuum between looking at the world this way and looking at the world that way. You can take many intermediate positions. Automatically, in this gradual universalizing, you discover there is great flexibility and continuity. Things are not so clear-cut in contradiction. Just because I look at it this way and another looks at it this way, there is no collision. They actually complement each other. That viewpoint adds something which mine was missing. And you begin to see things in deeper underlying truths, which are not so cut up. Even a point can come where the mind, especially if it is also rising by other means to the intuitivization, then you see everything as continuum. Nothing is cut off, nothing is isolated. Everything fills and completes everything else. And what are you expressing then? You're obviously expressing something that is true for this wider consciousness. So it must express, for it is the divine and universal will that it must express in its action upon the world. When that is the greater reality, your littleness is only a little puppet in front. What are you working for? That must fill. Now, we saw last time, he has pointed out all the limitations of the mind, limited by the physical, vital, sensational, emotional, intellectual outlooks. We explored these last time, the difference between them, and we don't need to repeat that. But now from this larger perspective, it must accept the world truths, the world energies, the world tendencies, the world purposes as its own, instead of clinging to its own intellectual ideas, desires and endeavors, preferences, objects, intentions, impulses. Now again he lists many, but against what? 4 terms he has used: world truths, world energies, world tendencies, and the world purposes. It goes from the deeper to the more formed. Deeper being always less in form, more in essence. So what is the world truths? The things which support the world make the world what it is. The truth of the world is, for example, the underlying divinity and the fulfillment of its knowledge, its power, its harmony, its love, its growth, its awakening of consciousness, etc. Very generally. But specifically, world truths are those ideas which are put out from the divine to be manifested. They are real ideas, as Sri Aurobindo says, because they exist in themselves and work to realize something. Each of flowers, animals, humans, planets, solar systems, galaxies is a physical formation of an idea of the divine, a vision, a possibility launched as a truth. And so those are the underlying things which are being fulfilled, and all of them are on a massive scale across the universe. They are movements as if beyond the universe, entering the universe, filling the whole universe. Literally on the scale of what we may mentally recognize as laws of physics. When you say such and such is a law of physics, gravity is a law of physics, what does it mean? It happens everywhere in the universe. Nothing exists which is not somehow subject to it. It may act differently in different ways because of circumstances, but it's one common principle. And so it's something like that. It's a principle working, acting, supporting. And then those principles work out through energies, massive waves, movements, entire galaxies thrown out in a burst and then dissolved. If you could see it across billions of years. Of course, we see a narrow span of time and we do not see these movements so obviously. But what are we doing? We are only manifesting a part of that through this individual focus. So the sense of I and the sense of my role in this life or at this moment is just a tiny focal point of something which is far greater. When this sense of the universal working becomes more and more clear, you find that you are less attached to those narrow personal preferences. You look at things in terms of long spans, even extending beyond your personal life. So what if it does not happen in this lifetime? I'll come back, take another body and continue the work. Doesn't matter. And this is natural to the soul's perspective. It's not natural to this little mind and little physical ego desire which thinks itself born with the body and dying with the body. But because the consciousness has become wider and deeper, all this becomes normal. So what are you serving? And according to your temperament or according to the need of the moment, you are serving the evolutionary power. Or in this particular case, you have come to participate in the supramental creation. How long will it take? What will be its form? Doesn't matter. It is this movement initiated from the Supreme working now to create something, and I'm here for that. And I do what I can in the tiny steps that I have to take at this moment. But the sense of what you're serving is this. So world energies, world tendencies, where is it going? What does it want to accomplish? One of the things you see today, for example, in the world, the tendency for the earth's consciousness of humanity to be unified, the tendency for broadening and widening to universalize. And these are large movements. And you are aligned to it. This is what you are working to fulfill. And the world purpose, very specifically now, what is the purpose of this? Orville is created for a purpose, a model township in which a practical human unity can be realized on spiritual principles. Now this is a very specific purpose. But the purpose itself, you find, is so broad. It includes everybody, all types, all interests, even all activities. So it's interesting that when you look from the world viewpoint, world truth, world energy, world tendency, world purpose, it's always universal in scope, allowing for specifics. And that's why he says, not clinging to its own intellectual ideas, desires, endeavors, preferences, objects, intentions, impulses. It's a roadmap of all the levels of your being, of your nature, where you have something pushing to fulfill its narrow littleness. You don't cling to these, they're there. If they don't align with the world purpose, we ignore. Or, more important, he says, these, so far as they remain, must be harmonized with the universal. So in this very movement of widening, most of these narrow things will get thinned out or dissolved. Some remain clingy, but some, though you discover, are very specific. They align to some deep need in your individual nature. And those you line up with, harmonize with the universal working. And as I mentioned last time, the practical result is your individual purpose in life, your individual work is now part of a universal movement. You are as if in alignment with the stream of energy that is pouring. You're not going against the divine will. You're executing something large, at the same time fulfilling your individual purpose. In this there is an extraordinary joy and the sense of being carried, which becomes so natural. Now, without going into all these specifics, you could simply have stayed in that alignment, living as a child on the mother's lap, and you would still feel yourself carried effortlessly through circumstances of life. But recognizing this in detail, becoming conscious of it in detail, the alignment would be much more complete, much more rich as an experience. Little elements which are not aligned, you would become conscious of and correct for them. Now, the next line is that cryptic sounding which we read earlier, but now from this context you will see how it makes enormous sense. It must then, next step, submit its knowledge and will at their very source to the divine knowledge and the divine will, and so arrive through submission at emergence. So far you still have this individual purpose aligned to the cosmic, but you still have an individual purpose. And then at their very source, you've made an alignment here. So there is an evolutionary force working to unify, working to lift, fine. I have dedicated my life to unifying, to uplifting, to growth of consciousness, whatever. The alignment has taken place here, but if you go back, at some point you may still feel a gap. So eventually he says, all this must go back to the knowledge and will at their very source. From where does the impulse come within you to act? From where does the impulse of awareness growing into knowledge emerge? And at that very point, as deep as you can to the origin, you align and join with that. And that's when the full perfection of the alignment will take place. And how far will this go? And so arrive through submission at emergence. Now this submitting, putting in the hands of the divine will, the divine knowledge, when you've put in the hands of, eventually there's a joining until you cannot distinguish anymore. And this is the emergence, you're merged into. There's no separate origination anymore. Still, he says, the description is completed when losing its personal light in the divine light and its personal initiative in the divine initiative. And this is a nuance which now makes so much sense. Light of consciousness which leads to knowledge, the initiative which takes the form of the will. You may join your will, you may join your knowledge in their origin, but still it can be as if a pool of personal light, less dim than the divine light, can remain, separating you, keeping some part of the awareness, and this itself must join into that. There is nothing left separating. And the same, he says, personal initiative, which begot the will, that may remain as if the sense of personal separation that gives rise to the will, that itself joins in. And so these last two lines you will see complete the perfection. Nothing remains which has any character of separateness. And now when you read the whole text again, you will see, it makes so much more sense. When we enter the character of the experience, the same text becomes lit up and becomes obvious. Although at this moment it is a part of our deeper or higher, more intuitive layers of consciousness which feel the truth of it. If we step out of that, fall into a normal, surface, mechanical thinking mind, we'll look back, what did we feel? I remember it felt so real, it felt so true, but I don't remember what it is. And so you come back into the state, and again it becomes obvious, it becomes lit up. When you begin to distinguish between these two positions of your consciousness, you'll find the key to reading Sri Aurobindo. Consciously entering the character of the experience as he describes it gives you a glimpse of what it is like. And that glimpse is like a template or a mold that then begins to form in you and begins to settle and shape you. But we have to make an effort to extend it rather than just snapping out and losing it. So now in the last line of the paragraph, he summarizes the whole process. And remember, earlier we have discussed in the beginning of the chapter, we should be able to see infinity and the absolute in everything. So to be first in tune with the infinite, in harmony with the divine, and then to be unified with the infinite, taken into the divine, is its condition, the soul's condition, of perfect strength and mastery. And this is precisely the very nature of the spiritual life and spiritual existence. And again, it is a bit cryptic, but when we enter through the experience, the gateway of experience, you'll feel the importance of this. In the movement, you saw first there was the widening of consciousness, and then the joining with the divine. And this is what he is summarizing. To be first in tune with the infinite. And the vocabulary tune, what is this tuning? When we listen to a pitch, let's say a group of people sings and you join the group. You could sing your own song at your own pitch and it will feel in a discord. You may sing beautifully, but it will still be in a discord. What do? You listen to the group, you catch the pitch, and then you join in at the same pitch. This movement of tuning is a movement of awareness, listening, and then joining into the listening. And so when he says, to be first in tune in the infinite is to become aware of the infinite, to feel it, and then to join it and sing with it or let it flow through you. That's what we saw in the whole description so far. So first is the setting up of the relationship with the infinite, which is what is that movement of universalizing. And then to be unified in tune with the infinite, in harmony with the divine. To be first in tune with the infinite, in harmony with the divine. So this is the other aspect. As there is this tuning with the infinite, you also enter in harmony with the divine will, the divine knowledge, the divine purpose. Why these two terms of infinite and then divine? Why does he speak of them separately? You'll see here throughout this paragraph, there are two facets which are being touched upon and a fine difference. The soul's consciousness as it is, and the soul's sense of purpose of what it wants to do. So when you saw earlier, it must first extend its consciousness and see the universe in itself. And then second, it must accept world truths and world energies and world tendencies. They're different things. So as you are, who you are grows, and then the sense of purpose that you have also changes. So these are two nuances that you get in this widening of the soul's consciousness. So to be first in tune with the infinite is the sense of wideness, the consciousness becoming vast. But then what is happening with the consciousness? In harmony with the divine will, knowledge, purpose, etc. The movement that will come in the expression. And then to be unified with the infinite, taken into the divine. So the completeness of this movement of tuning in and being in harmony, you still are separate. You're tuned in, you're in harmony, but you're still separate. And then the joining that takes place, no more a separation. To be unified with the infinite, there is no you, there is no finite. Taken into the divine, there is no separate ego, only the divine will and purpose. Is its condition of perfect strength and mastery. Until this is achieved, you do not have the perfect strength and mastery. At every step in the movement, there is growing strength, growing mastery, but it becomes perfect when this is completed. So we'll reread the sentence and you'll see what it's catching as an experience. So important and profound. To be first in tune with the infinite, in harmony with the divine. And then to be unified with the infinite, taken into the divine, is its condition of perfect strength and mastery. Now, nuance again. In the beginning, you have to first be in tune and be in harmony. So, an effort that you make. But in the second stage, then to be unified with the infinite, taken into the divine. So unified with the infinite, still one has the sense that something is being done, but taken into the divine has a very clear sense, you don't do it, the divine takes you in. You see? You can only go so far and make effort, but as long as you make effort, you and your effort are still remaining separate. It is one of the most profound secrets of all spiritual practice, that at first you have to make effort, but at last you have to let go of the effort and let the divine complete what you were trying to do. As long as your personal drive fills it, and the stronger your personal drive, the more you're defining yourself in separation from the divine and preventing the divine from taking you and doing it for you. And yet you have to start with it, because otherwise you're just a lump of mass, unresponsive to the divine. So your personal effort begins an action, and increasingly as the personal effort grows and submits to the divine will or the divine consciousness or the divine knowledge or the divine love, these begin to fill your personal effort. They amplify the results from within of what you're doing. And you find your little effort is carried 10 more steps by the push and support of the divine action, aligned, working through your effort. If you remove your personal effort, then it does not have the support to act. But as that grows, your personal effort now begins to become one of not doing, but accepting, allowing, invoking, remaining in tune, in balance with the flow of the divine knowledge or energy. And it becomes less and less, thinner and thinner, until the sense of I begins to dissolve completely, and there is only that. It acts. You are only enjoying its action. And at some point, maybe even the sense of I dissolves completely. There is only that. This is the last part. Always the fulfillment of the realization, the perfection, is the divine taking and completing the last step. In many traditions across the world, you'll find this idea in different ways suggested. In the Buddhist tradition also, they have the idea that you can go all the way up to a point, and then you have to stop doing, stop trying. You have to let go even the effort. And that's when it chooses you or not. It completes or not. You wait with full trust. There is not the element of bhakti, obviously, in this. But in the bhakti movement, it takes a more clear form. You give yourself joyously, and the divine fulfills and completes at his own time. But you have the joy of the closeness, and however long he takes, it is still a joyous process. In some other occult traditions, I found, particularly in some of the Greek and Egyptian traditions, there is the idea, they use the symbol of the pyramid, you're climbing up the steps, and at the last step, it's as if you find next to you another person who's struggling and unable to complete. If at that time, instead of fulfilling your work, you help him to complete his work, that leads you to the fulfillment. So the idea of setting aside yourself for another. As an image, again, in certain Buddhist traditions, this idea takes this form, that you go as far as you can, but your fulfillment is only when you can serve humanity. But somewhere these images are less complete, in that there is still you doing something to another and a reward of being good or of being selfless. So as an image, it's less effective, but you see the idea behind is the same, that you can only approach the infinite. It is only when the infinite takes you in and joins you and absorbs you that the identification is complete. So this one phrase, taken into the divine, gives you that hint. And then to be unified with the infinite, taken into the divine, is its condition of perfect strength and mastery, the soul's condition. Again, strength and mastery, the nuance here. When you look at the nature of life, and life being largely a struggle, the one thing which you see required is the strength, the resilience. When your consciousness becomes wider, this becomes even more important. As we saw earlier, you are overwhelmed by all that's happening in the universe. You may not consciously know all the details, but the sense of it even can be overwhelming. Sri Aurobindo describes that experience in Savitri and some other poems as if the pain of every single heart in the universe is your pain, even as the joy of every heart is your joy, and that is overwhelming in some sense. If not for the fact that your consciousness was wide or wider than the universe, that could not be contained. But because it is wide, it's able to hold and contain, and still it is universal, overwhelming in some sense. And so the sense of strength is at the base of everything. As one grows in depth and in height, there is a greater and greater strength, and I will use the word immunity. In spite of all these, the consciousness remains free, pure, and always blissful. While supporting all this, it is free, pure, blissful. While engaged in all this, in the very details of life and struggling on the front, it is free, pure, blissful. And even on that level, it feels effortless. The struggle is there. My hand is in collision with the wall, but I experience my hand and the wall as part of me. So is there a struggle? It's more like a play from that poise. So the sense of perfect strength is underlying. That's why he places it first, and then mastery. You cannot have mastery if you did not have the stability that comes with the perfect strength. And the mastery would then be everything, being an expression of the divine, is now part of the action, part of the work. Nothing is left out, everything is included, and so on. And this is precisely the very nature of the spiritual life and the spiritual existence. Again, why spiritual life and spiritual existence? What's the difference? The sense of spiritual existence is the consciousness as it is, static. The sense of spiritual life is the way it expresses itself in the forms, in the movements. And so both of these are included in the strength and the mastery. And so this paragraph gives us the big picture of that movement of universalizing, which will lead to not just individual freedom and mastery, but a cosmic freedom and mastery. This will be the result of the ascension of the soul from its subjection to nature to the state of the spirit where it has freedom and mastery. But in this passage, there are many steps. At each step you have as if a relationship, isn't it? And each of these steps can be experienced separately. And yet there has to be a continuity. And this is the brilliant formulation of Sri Aurobindo. I don't think anybody has been able to do this so far or has seen it so clearly and articulated it so clearly. You will see the relationships which he describes, and then he will show you how actually there is a transition of continuity from one to the other. I'll read the first two lines and then you will understand the full scope of it. The distinction made in the Gita between the Purusha and the Prakriti gives us the clue to the various attitudes which the soul can adopt towards nature. Now, there are many positions, many relationships it can have in its movement towards perfect freedom and rule. So as this ascension takes place, many relationships. Now each of these relationships can be had on all levels. But at each stage, one of these becomes the normal or more true relationship for that level. So the Purusha is, says the Gita, witness, upholder, source of the sanction, knower, Lord, enjoyer. So 6 steps. Now we will view these 6 steps as steps of an ascent, because that's how he will describe it. And yet at each step we will see how this relationship could be maintained throughout. In fact, all 6 relationships are simultaneously present. And when we read the sense of continuity, how one implies or leads to the other and to the other and to the other, we will see it no more as 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, but multidimensional. The soul in relation to nature is always in this 6-fold relationship with all the variations in between. But at this level, this is your starting point of the passage. And as you shift and develop and perfect these relationships, you are making a transition in consciousness until you reach the full scope of freedom and mastery at the top. So just keep this at the back of the mind as we read the rest of the text, which actually spans the next 3 paragraphs. And so we will do it over a few days. So the Purusha is, says the Gita, witness, you stand back. You are untouched by anything that happens. You do nothing. Next, upholder. So you can choose to be totally immune, or you can accept the fact that you are also accepting what happens. Implied in doing nothing is the acceptance that you will do nothing and allow her the freedom. Right? So you're also implied as the upholder, but you can make that aspect explicit now. So you see the continuity from one to the next. And then, source of the sanction. In the very fact that you're upholding means you're accepting this. You could accept that, you could accept the other, or refuse, or not accept. When you not accept this, you're accepting something else. So effectively the soul has the choice to say more of this, less of that. And so slant nature's play, direct it as it chooses. Source of the sanction. and then knower. The relationship becomes more complete at each step, because finally nature is doing what you chose, what you accepted. You realize it is your knowledge, your choice, which is leading the whole play. And this completes in the Lord, where everything that happens ultimately is because the soul chose or willed actively. And why did it will actively? The last step, enjoyer. Nature is only the outpouring of the soul's energy for the purpose of its enjoyment and play, from a poise of freedom and yet perfect mastery of the play. And you see, in the form of it, witness who is totally cut off and separated, doing nothing at all, nature goes on mechanically, to one where you are the source and nature is your own expression. There is no separation, they are one, but in freedom and mastery. All these steps in between. So Sri Aurobindo will begin with the first one, and then through these fine nuances, exploring each thoroughly. Why they are important? Because in the ascent of the consciousness to the poise of mastery, we will take these positions. As a first step, you must be able to separate yourself in a perfect status of witness, just in order to disengage from all the ropes that nature has tied into you, all the controls which she has plugged into you. If you do not separate, you cannot make the ascent itself. As long as you are entangled, your ascent will be held back by the chains in which she has bound you, or by which she has formed you even. So the soul may assume, if it wishes, the poise of the pure witness, Sakshi. The word Sakshi in Sanskrit, if you go back to the root, it means self-seeing. Observing by yourself as separate from what you observe. It may look on at the action of nature as a thing from which it stands apart. It watches, but does not itself participate. Now, each of these phrases is important. If you dwell on it, you'll find there are nuances of how you separate yourself. Let's look at this again. The soul may assume, if it wishes. You have to make the choice. It's not going to happen automatically. If it wishes. Already it means the soul has the power to do it. It has the power to accept to be free, or the power to accept to be bound. In the very fact that you are not choosing to be free, you are accepting to be bound. This is the condition we have all begun with. We forgot even that we can choose to be free. In a sense, we chose to forget that we can be free. And that's when you're fully embedded. And now you make a choice. So if it chooses, if it wishes, the poise of the pure witness, Sakshi, it may look on at the action of nature. So first is this movement of observing. You have to observe, and in observation you begin the process of separation. But if you don't begin to observe, you cannot separate. I observe a stream of thought that's passing through me. I observe emotions taking place with me. I observe sensations of my body. You will see in the very basic training of certain Buddhist practices, such as Vipassana, they teach you to step back from the senses and simply observe the senses, doing nothing, responding in no way. Simply, they are there, they go. You do nothing. So, look on at the action of nature. What are you doing? You are looking on. Who is doing the action? That's nature, it's not you. As a thing from which it stands apart. This is now the second degree. As you observe, you stand back from what you observe and exaggerate the sense of separation. My finger is hurting, there is pain. When I'm identified, I say, I'm in pain. I'm in pain. Quick, quick, put something to stop the pain. I'm suffering because of the pain. I observe there is pain. What is it? And now I can kick in my scientific learning from school studies that says the pain is only nerves which are tingling, sending electricity to my brain. Yes. That means the pain is not me, it is only responses of patterns of electricity. I am not pain, I am observing pain. And the finger is not burning, it's not actually hurting, the burning is over. It's only signals it's giving out. Okay? And now I separate myself in the process. I am not finger, I am not electrical signal. I need not get upset with the electrical signals which come from the cells of my finger. So the sense of separation follows, but you have to consciously exaggerate. It's not enough that you observe. In observing, you can get sucked into identification also. And then, as a thing from which it stands apart, it watches but does not itself participate. And this is the third level at which you stabilize this separation. You watch but do not participate. Now you'll notice if the pain is very strong, it tends to pull your awareness into the pain to get back to identification. And you end up participating in it. And you have to pull back, separate. And there's a subtle tug of war of consciousness until you are able to break free the thing which ties you, by which nature was pulling you back. Once you get the hang of this, the rest becomes easy. Now you begin to extend this to everything else. Emotions, sensations, sentiments, all your past things or reactions of which are typically habits. Someone shouts at me, I get upset. Someone insults me, I get disturbed. And I say, what is this? I disconnect the reaction of disturbance from me. So when somebody insults me, there is a ripple of emotion. I am not disturbed. The emotions are agitating. Someone gives a knock, there is pain. I am not in pain. It's the same with the emotions. Even with the thoughts, one begins to be able to separate. And at that point you can say, I'm surprised, today my thoughts are a bit strange. Where is this coming from? Yes, that's because I am sitting in the middle of the marketplace. These are not my normal thoughts. This is what I'm catching from the marketplace. Here now there are no thoughts. Why? Because I'm in a space which is clear of thoughts. You begin to notice these things. And all this while, there is no participation in the thing which is happening. You are effectively separate and free. Now here, Sri Aurobindo gets into the details and nuances of this and shows how this separation itself can have multiple, let's say, flavors or levels. We have seen the importance of this quietistic capacity, and that was part of the discussion in the Yoga of Works. It is the basis of the movement of withdrawal by which we can say of everything, body, life, mental action, thought, sensation, emotion. This is Prakriti working in the life, mind and body. It is not myself, it is not even mine. So this exercise of saying this is Prakriti working in the mind, life, body, it is not myself, it is not even mine. This we have to keep repeating, but on all these 5 levels. If you think about it, the whole exercise can be developed over many days and weeks, can be made perfect, maybe taking years sometimes to make complete. With the body you start with. This is Prakriti. Not mine, not myself. Or not myself and then not mine. Same with the life. Life impulses which come. The instincts which come. And then the mental action which comes in thought forms. Then the thoughts themselves. Sensations. And emotions. He's kept emotion last because those are often the most difficult to separate from. And thus come to the soul's separation from these things and to their quiescence. First would be the separation, and the practical result of the separation will be these things will start becoming quiet. And we discover very quickly, if you engage with it, it grows. If you disengage from it and do not participate, it loses force. And this is a practical experience one will have. And the result of the experience is you realize by engaging with it, you were giving it energy. By refusing to engage with it, there's nothing sustaining except some external energy which may come and pass through. But even that, when you separate from that, after a while, at best some limited mechanical activity remains, but it doesn't have any purpose, it doesn't have any meaning. It just goes on, life goes on. You are not involved. There is then the ability also to withdraw energy from it. And that is something which will come later when there is the sanction which is given. But when that is done, you can actually shut down any activity and consciously choose to stop it. But all of that further development rests upon making this separation as complete as possible. So thus come to the soul's separation from these things and to their quiescence. This may, therefore, be an attitude of renunciation, or at least of non-participation, tamasic, with a resigned and inert endurance of the natural action so long as it lasts. So now he's going to describe 3 levels of it. You take an attitude, you renounce. This is nature, not me, not mine. And I choose not to participate at the very least. So the tamasic resignation will be, it goes on. I endure. It's nature working. As long as it goes on, eventually the body will shut down, the mind will separate, or whenever it happens. I am not concerned. The next grade is rajasic, with a disgust, aversion, and recoil from it. Oh, this is nature. Oh, terrible. It always binds you, it always enslaves you, limits you. It's dark, it's muddy, it holds you back from this clarity and freedom. So there's a revolt, but the state of relationship of the soul to that separation. And then the sattvic, with a luminous intelligence of the soul's separateness, and the peace and joy of aloofness and repose. So the whole relationship is clear. Oh yes, I'm always free. This is the real truth of things. While nature goes on, I am peaceful, joyous, aloof, at rest. I do nothing, I have to do nothing. So great, wonderful. But also it may be attended by an equal and impersonal delight, as of a spectator at a show, joyous but unattached, and ready to rise up at any moment and as joyfully depart. So here's a further nuance, not within the tamasic, rajasic or sattvic. You see, that sattvic attitude you will find often in the more philosophical traditions. In certain devotional traditions, the rajasic attitude is common. They encourage you to have disgust as a way of getting free more quickly. And the tamasic, of course, is possible even, it's similar to the sattvic in some way, and some philosophical traditions will do that. But they're the more ascetic ones who just say, well, suffer it while it is there, you'll be free eventually. But what he gives you now is something much more valuable. It's not the highest. From this will come the highest. And here is, it may, but also it may be attended by an equal and impersonal delight, as of a spectator at a show. So you can actually enjoy that poise of relationship, of separation. You can actually watch and enjoy the whole experience, but without being attached to specific outcomes. So you go to a show, cinema, theater, and you watch to the extent that you feel like, and you say, well, I have an appointment, I should go. It was very interesting while it was on. Sorry, I can't stay for the next 6 hours. I walk away. We had, traditionally, in certain special occasions, performances which would begin at sunset and continue through till sunrise. So at some point you say, it's time for me to go to sleep, but it was great. When you get up and go, you still look back and say, that was enjoyable, but you do not miss the fact that you're moving away. I'll see it another time. If you see the relationship we set, increasingly now, when we watch cinema on the computer screen, and you know that it's available to you at any point, you can pause. Doorbell rings, you pause, you go, come back, continue. But you can also say, no problem, I'll come back when I finish my work. So you can go with as much clarity and joy as the participation. Joyous but unattached, and ready to rise up at any moment and as joyfully depart. This part is what we have to cultivate. The act of leaving, the act of separation from something which you have enjoyed detached, is as joyous. This is not possible as long as some element of you remains attached. It is only when the detachment is complete that you can enjoy the leaving as much as the watching. So it's often a test. If you have taken the poise of the spectator, very interesting life, very interesting experiences. Wow, I have a huge problem I didn't expect. That's a challenge. Or somebody in a domain of work. All my last 10 years of work that I've piled up, just destroyed like that. Amazing, what an experience. And if you listen to the person saying it, you'll say, wow, doesn't he feel upset? Isn't he angry that he has lost everything? No, it's fascinating. I never expected this could happen. And you can even watch your emotions or your thoughts and say, oi, this is a reaction I didn't expect. My emotions are so agitated, my thought is so confused. But I am not these. So the test of it will be that you can walk away as easily and enjoy the walking away while you enjoy equally the play. As joyfully depart. The words he has used are very important. Impersonal delight, which is equal. That means if the show changes from a comedy to a tragedy, it will be equal and the delight will be impersonal. Whether the story swings this way or that way, oh, interesting. You have no personal attachment to the outcome. The attitude of the witness, capital W, at its highest, is the absolute of unattachment and freedom from affection by the phenomena of the cosmic existence. So from here you rise up to that wide poise which was discussed earlier, looking at the whole cosmic scene. And on the cosmic scale, unattached, free from affection by the phenomena. Now in practice, as you move towards this witness at its highest, as you make steps and small steps, you can experience elements of this by simply widening your perspective. So let's say this morning I tripped and fell and hurt myself, and so now I'm going to carry the pain for the rest of the day, or at least for a few hours. Rather than getting upset and cursing, I said, very interesting. But it'll last for a day or two. It won't be there after 1 year, not after 1 month. Okay. You widened your lens. When you zoom in on a detail, the detail becomes large. You zoom out, and look at the big picture, okay. And Mother gives this as an example of a practice one can do or a state one can develop. She says, when you're lying down on the terrace looking at the big, huge universe, after a while you realize your life is so small in relation to all that. Millions of lives happening. Even if you look at your own life across time, after millions of lives perhaps, this is just one more. And you'll have many more as long as you like. You can enjoy the rest of eternity across many lives. And what's the problem of the moment? It's trivial. And she says it's like a little patch of cloud that drifts across the clear sky. Let it come, let it go. You are not disturbed. Of course you can still act on it, but you're not disturbed either way. When it appears, you're not disturbed. When you act on it, you're not disturbed. Whether your action is successful or a failure, you're not disturbed. And this comes with the widening of perspective. And so you'll find it a useful habit. Whenever you have to deal with different situations, take the large perspective and then zoom in on the action. Take a large perspective and then zoom in again. Go back and forth. After a while, you'll find the sense of the large perspective will remain even as you zoom in. And then the equality becomes almost automatic. If this is combined with the earlier exercise of widening, universalizing, the equality is natural to that status. So this is the attitude of the witness going all the way finally to the cosmic play. Everything is part of the cosmic play. This is also the station of the divine. That's why he puts capital W. On some level, if you come to this poise, you have identified with the divine in his relationship as witness to the whole cosmos. So you remember I said each of these can be experienced on all levels of consciousness. And this is where he takes you in the witness poise, which justifies this as a first step and an experience here in your limited consciousness also. But from here we will take a further step. As the pure witness, the soul refuses the function of upholder or sustainer of nature. A very interesting idea. By choosing to be pure witness, you have chosen to refuse to be upholder. The upholder, bharta, is another. God or force or maya, but not the soul. This is the poise you have chosen to take. Something is upholding the play. As you watch, as a spectator, what makes for the cinema to appear? Well, there's a screen, there's a projector, there's a light, there's even someone who's made the film. Not you. You're only the spectator. Which only admits the reflection of the natural action upon its watching consciousness, but not any responsibility for maintaining or continuing it. So you have put a limited relationship that the light of the screen reflects in your eyes, in your consciousness. You observe, you notice. Maybe even you have this very detached, impersonal delight, but you never started it, you never choose to end it. Someone, something. He has used 3 words, God or force or maya. And they refer broadly to 3 different categories of philosophies. So those in which God as a personality is initiating the whole movement of creation will say, God set it up and it's happening, you are just the observing soul. In this again there are variations. There is the mechanistic view. God wound up the whole universe like a clock and set it running. He started the projector, set it running, and it's unfolding. Or you can put God actively involved. God is playing, God is pulling, pushing. He is the puppeteer behind the scenes. Okay, He is giving you a show. But you are not supporting it. He is supporting it. The other is force. So the force is something impersonal. And the physics viewpoint of modern science is similar to this. There seems to be some gigantic explosion in which the whole universe was born from a big bang, the energy released is somehow continuing in its momentum, driving all the molecules and atoms and events, carrying on. Where it comes from, where it goes, I don't know. I never created it, I'm not involved. Or Maya, which is the more subtle and nuanced idea, which says that this whole thing is almost illusory. It's a simulation. And in fact, modern physics is now tending towards this, where you come to the recognition that it's as if there is a fine grain. They've come to the idea that there is a unit of time below which you cannot cut up time. There's a unit of space, the fine structure constant, below which you cannot cut up space. And that means every event, every point in space and time is like cut out. That's your screen on which all these things are happening. And there's some gigantic computational power which is computing, and the whole thing is moving along mechanically. It's a simulation. Where is it taking place? In some giant, we don't know what, computer, consciousness, whatever name you give to it, but it's unreal. It's like a character inside the video game doesn't know that itself is a product of the same play of light in which everything is happening. So you can see broadly these are three very different viewpoints, and all nuances of it would come as variations of these. But not the soul, which only admits the reflection of the natural action upon its watching consciousness. I could close my eyes, but I'm accepting for the awareness of these things to reflect in me, but not any responsibility for maintaining or continuing it. Now comes the nuance. It does not say all this is in me and maintained by me, an activity of my being. But at the most, this is imposed on me, but really external to myself. So you can actually read this and stabilize yourself in this idea. But then you recognize, unless there is a clear and real duality in existence, this cannot be the whole truth of the matter. If reality was cut up, then you could say this. But reality is not cut up. The very fact that you're observing, that you're allowing the light to reflect, means that there is a connection of one reality. If you take the illusory concept of the Maya, you are inside on the same screen on which everything is happening. You are observing the screen, but you're a part of the screen at the same time. There is a connection. So it cannot be the whole truth to be separate like this. The soul is the upholder also. It supports in its being the energy which unrolls the spectacle of the cosmos and which conducts its energies. Somewhere inside you, you have accepted that poise, that this will unfold, this will happen, and reflect in you. So especially this is obvious when you look at it on the cosmic scale. Stand back, the whole universe is like one big giant simulation or drama. There is nothing outside. And so you have to recognize that you accepted the play of the energy, because the energy is linked, part of you. There is nothing else. When you're a little small person, you can say there is a theater outside, there is a person who operated it. It's separate from you. But the moment you bring everything back and view it as part of a cosmic play, nothing else than you. And you recognize there is a part that accepted and supports the energy, which unrolls the spectacle and conducts the details of the energy flows. When the Purusha accepts this upholding, it may do it still passively and without attachment, or it can also do it actively, as we will see later. So, you come to the recognition that this drama would not be if I did not accept to watch or participate. If I did not accept to uphold the fact that it's unfolding. I could disengage from it, refuse that, and it would cease to be effectively. So I've accepted to uphold it. And it could be a passive upholding. Without attachment, feeling that it contributes the energy, but not that it controls and determines it. Well, the energy came by my very acceptance to enjoy the play or to be in this. But once released, the energy is doing its thing, not me. That's the first passive position. The control is another. God or force or the very nature of Maya. That's how it is. The character of the energy is that it keeps on doing like this. The soul only upholds indifferently so long as it must, so long perhaps as the force of its past sanction and interest in the energy continues and refuses to be exhausted. So once you accepted to participate in this, you released the energy, and as long as that push is there, it will go on. When that push winds down, the clock spring winds down, maybe it will stop. But I am not actively involved in this unfolding. But if the attitude of the upholder is fully accepted, an important step forward has been taken towards identification with the active Brahman and his joy of cosmic being. For the Purusha has become the active giver of the sanction. Now this passive was, you released it and then it happens. The active is taking full responsibility of that role, and then you say, well, at each moment there is the sanction. Because I'm continuing to accept to watch, it's going on. Because I'm continuing to accept this direction of the play, it goes on. And this brings you to the poise of the Brahman, which is, while still pouring out all energies and moving, still free and supporting. And this is the position that the soul comes to. For the Purusha has become the active giver of the sanction. So now he will see further nuance of this, the sanction giver, where you are the one who is choosing, and that is the word used is Anumanta. Witness, upholder, and then source of the sanction, which is what we will see in the next paragraph, but we'll keep that for next time. As a practice to make immediate use of this study, one way to do would be to work on this poise of separation, of witness, of observer, as far as possible, to make it as complete as you can, maybe with the body, maybe with the emotions, maybe with the thoughts, maybe with all three. And then notice, as it becomes more complete, that you actually have this fine option of giving more energy or not giving more energy to a movement, but from the poise of separation. And you can play with this experience. Practically, it's the first step towards any mastery. You want mastery over your body sensations and reactions and instincts. You want mastery over your emotional reactions, mastery over your thoughts. The first step will be to be able to separate from what's happening in order then to be able to turn around upon it. But by making the separation as complete as possible, you will have greater power of intervention. So we'll hold our study here, because this is already quite rich in the nuances that he offers. When you reread this passage, you'll find that there are so many practical steps that you can pause upon and explore and then move on to the next, or just do it generally without going into details. You can pause here and take up any questions or comments. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the moment you enter into identification, you are no more the one giving sanction. You find yourself tossed around by the energy. You feel yourself as if created by or played by, like a toy, by the energy, by nature. So when I'm identified with my pain, I am in pain, I am suffering. Oh, do something, put ice on my finger. You see, I'm jumping. My whole body identified with this consciousness which is disturbed. The pain is here. Why am I moving my hand and jumping? It's irrational. But that's the way nature in me is making me jump and getting me upset. I separate from the pain and I say, okay, the finger is, even it's so painful, the finger is twitching from the pain. I am not twitching. Oh, it's happening, strange. You see? And at that point, I can say, I can choose to participate in the pain or refuse the pain. It's not my pain, and I do not want the pain. I relax my finger and will the pain into silence. I've already changed the relationship in separating that I can now push back at it. But when I'm in it, it is pushing on me, it is controlling me and driving me. Okay? Mm-hmm.
So where is the point of that? So the coming into existence of the individualized soul being.
You're asking how it comes into existence as a separate soul?
Because it is, as far as I have understood it, the soul being as a soul individuality comes into being by taking up the essence of the experience.
Okay.
So
It grows.
put that, what spectrum would you
Okay. So now when we're speaking of this word Purusha and Prakriti, the description which we're going through can be observed on many levels. Now, in the mind, the part of your mind that stands back from the thoughts is your mental Purusha. And the mind as your scene of drama and the thoughts playing is the mental Prakriti. Or similar things on the emotions or even in the body. I can stand back from all these in a part of my mind which looks at mind, body, life in one spectrum, but it's still a part of my consciousness, not the soul as the ultimate psychic being. When I go back all the way into the psychic being, this status is natural, it is effortless. The psychic being is not bound in nature, is not inherently attached. It has this poise of the joyous player, even witness, but it doesn't have the mastery. But it is watching, it is enjoying, and through the scenes that it is enjoying, it is learning and absorbing. So on a very deep level, there is an absorption through the experiences, which is automatic, in the very nature of the relationship of the psychic being with the rest of your personality. But within your personality, a similar thing happens. While my mind is worried with my struggles and my conflicts of life, I look back in a part of the mind which detaches and observes. I look back at the last 1 year of my journey and I say, you know what, I have suffered a lot through these problems, but I have grown so much. And it's taking place in the mind, in the Purusha of the mind, which is able to be at least partly separate. And it's there is a poise of the mind. But the bulk of my mind is still involved in this identification and the suffering. Now you'll notice the people who have the greatest skill of using their circumstances for growth are those in whom this poise of the detached witness of the mind is more developed. So yes, I get disturbed, but I'm able to step back from the disturbance. I'm able to bring my thoughts to clarity and quiet, and then to act in the midst of my crisis. So there's a word in French, sang-froid, cold blood, literally. It's as if they are not disturbed. You throw at them the worst crisis, the fellow says, interesting, let me see what I can do. And it does something. While everybody else is jumping and screaming in panic, this fellow has cold blood, so to say. But it's really this poise of the vital and the mind which can stand back and not be carried away. It doesn't mean the person is not disturbed. There are layers in him which are in panic, but he's able to separate from it. So all these are poises of freedom, but on that level you experience the growth, or at least you recognize the growth. Having been through this crisis, I know I've grown. Or in the midst of this crisis, I am thinking, oh, this is such a great opportunity now for me to really grow, learn from this, overcome this, whatever. So it's happening on all levels that you have the Purusha and Prakriti relationship. But at the deepest level, it is the psychic being, which is the individual Purusha growing. Behind that, the support of the self as the silent Brahman supporting all this movement of the play.
Two questions. One is I'm not clear about. One is I'm not clear about what you mean by choice here, and the second one is that even if you think you're being a witness, it's all in the mind, isn't it? Because somewhere in the body, whatever, like you're talking about a crisis and a disturbance, so you may not be disturbed, you may act, but somewhere it affects your body in some way, or the vital in some way, though you cannot express it or see it.
So your first question is choice of what? What is you referring to?
When you said that the soul chooses, when you're talking to the source of sanction.
Okay. So yes, it looks as if at first the witness experience is in the mind. And it's true of most of our life, because that's the part of us where we are rooted. If I ask you, who are you as a person, primarily it is your mind that you are conscious of. The body is what you have, it's easy to separate. Even your emotions, to some degree, you are not so attached to. If I give you a choice, I'm sorry, we will have to transplant your consciousness. So we will transplant your brain into a new body. You would accept because your mind is your identity, isn't it? But there is an experience of the Purusha status in the life energy, even in the emotions. Emotions are still part of the mind, close to the mind, but in the pure life energy. And there's a similar experience of the body consciousness. Now it's difficult to experience directly because these parts in us are semi-conscious or subconscious. But if you work at it, I'll try to say how you can get to something of this. You feel the life energy flowing in you, churning, pushing forward impulses, instinctive drives, pushing up emotions, thoughts even, driving your body, making sure your heart is beating, all this energy you feel. And then as you become very quiet, you will feel in the energy itself, there is a part as if supporting, not in movement. And if you can become conscious of it, suddenly it opens out and you feel this wide base of energy, which is still solid, unchanging, against which this energy is flowing here. And one can experience like this the poise of the vital Purusha. So Sri Aurobindo uses this vocabulary, Manomaya Purusha, the mental Purusha, Pranamaya Purusha, the pranic consciousness as Purusha. And there's a similar experience in the body consciousness. You can make yourself very quiet, identify with the body and become very quiet, and you'll feel there's a part of the body consciousness which is still supporting the whole body's existence. And if you can get to that, it is possible to help regenerate the body from inside out. Just as in the mind, if you can stand back from your thoughts, you can will your mind into silence or direct your thoughts in whatever way you want. Similarly, in the body consciousness, when you go back to that stillness of the body consciousness, you're aware, not in the activity of the body. From there you can will and as if reshape the tendencies of your body and body instincts, and even regenerate something in the body biology processes. So yes, Purusha is normally experienced more as a part of the mind which stands back, but the equivalent experience exists on all levels. Behind all three is the Purusha of the psychic being, which is free of these, and it has the sense of seeing across lives. When you get close to that consciousness, the first thing that happens is no more the sense of limited time. Because you know you have always been, you will always be, And there's the sense that even if this life was extinguished by a blow, by an accident, I am not extinguished. I am immortal, permanent. And so that begins to fill, and with it the sense of having been and always being, and with it comes the sense of the universe being like a playground. Wow, such a fascinating experience, such an opportunity for growth and adventure. And that comes there. Behind that, you have the Purusha of the self, the silence, the true witness, capital W, which is what we read earlier, that stands back. If I read the line again. Absolute of unattachment and freedom from affection by the phenomena of the cosmic existence. And it's as if at that point, in the solidity of the self, the whole universe could go whoop. Nothing shakes. It could burst in, burst out, extinguish. Nothing shakes. This is so solid. And so that would be really the foundation of the whole Purusha experience itself. It supports all these Purusha poises on different levels of your personality. So a question about choice. If you chose not to participate, what would happen? Yes, but if you chose not to even observe it, effectively it would cease to be, it would cease to exist, at least to your consciousness. Isn't it? And if your consciousness does not participate and it ceases to be to your consciousness, is it even there? This is really the problem which is formulated in quantum physics. When you put the particle in a box and you do not observe it, is it in this state or that? Exaggerated to a macroscopic level, they'll say, put a cat in a box with poison. Is the cat alive or dead? Is the cat even existing? You see, you can push it all the way there. Is the box existing if you turn away from it? So there is this idea that if consciousness is not registering the movement of the energy, even does the energy exist? And the Sankhya tradition solves this problem by saying there are many consciousnesses. And so if one fellow goes to sleep, the other is watching, it keeps the whole show going. But really it comes to that, and this is the experience you have when you are in this experience of watching the movie. You close your eyes, there is no movie. And this is complete when you look at it from the whole cosmic scale, where there's only this one, there is no other for it to continue. You close your eyes, universe ends. This is the way it is described as Brahma's night. Brahma as creative power opens his eyes and the whole universe is born. He closes his eyes and the universe ceases to be. Of course, on a minor scale, in our little consciousness, you don't experience that, except as an appearance, because there is the bigger consciousness which is sustaining it. But when you expand the awareness to the whole, you can see how there is nothing else. If this ceases to accept, everything shuts down. It's as if the energy is absorbed, which was put out. The beauty of this description Sri Aurobindo gives you is that although the relationships are so distinct, he shows you how one implies the other and leads to the next. And at each step, the soul as if is rising one step higher from complete subjugation to greater freedom. At first freedom and then greater mastery. And so we'll follow this description further next Saturday. So recall the earlier paragraph we read. As the consciousness rises, it must also universalize itself, because its purpose is to fulfill the divine and the universal will. And that movement we saw can be done in 3 different ways, more superficially and then more profoundly. And eventually there has to be the merging of your littleness into the infinity, of your separateness into the divine. And as this becomes more and more complete, there is strength that grows and the mastery that grows. It will be useful to reread the whole passage while it is still fresh. And if you like, you can do it when you get home or even tomorrow and dwell on some of these things. You'll find as you read, certain things will stand out, which for you are at that moment most valuable or most relevant. You'll find in the act of reading, it is as if you'll be inspired to put into action, because that's how he awakens the experience within you or gives you the energy or the insight which helps to grow and deepen the experience.
I tell you something. This week I read Nature and Soul in Orly Radio in French.
Oh, yes.
4 pages. And I want to listen to what you explain. Incredible. It's exactly what I understand.
Yes.
I learned it about today. I'm so happy. But it's very, very interesting. Shravan tell when you read in collective, alone, I am alone for the radio, but you receive. When I read, show me, give me knowledge through some words, some
Exactly.
It's very, very interesting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Not for you, for sure.
Yes, he pours the experience.
Yeah.
He pours the experience and imprints it on us. And we grow each time. When we reread, it's as if now what was prepared earlier builds the base for something more and something more.